You'll get the house cleaning schedule and nothing else, my stepfather said, sliding the folded paper across the table without even looking up at me. That's what coal women get in this family? My mother's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Nobody in that room knew what was sitting in my bag. Nobody knew it was already too late for him to say that. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, stick around because this one gets ugly before it gets good. And I promise you the ending is worth every second. My name is Margot Delaney, and for 11 years I lived in a house in Charleston, South Carolina, where I was fed, clothed, and educated, and never once, not a single time, treated like I actually belonged there. I want to tell you exactly how that happened, because the version of this story where I just quietly accepted it isn't the version that's true. And I don't do quiet anymore. My mother, Elaine, was a housekeeper. She started working for a man named Harold Whitmore when I was 8 years old, after my own father passed away and left us with almost nothing but a stack of medical bills. Harold owned 2 furniture showrooms and a house with a wine cellar bigger than our old apartment. My mother scrubbed his floors, managed his calendar, and raised his son, Colton, almost entirely on her own, because Harold was always at the showroom at hours that never quite made sense. 2 years into working for him, he proposed. I remember being 9 years old and thinking it sounded like something out of a movie. The housekeeper marrying the man whose house she cleaned. What nobody tells you is that the marriage doesn't erase the arrangement. It just gives it a new name. My mother kept doing exactly what she'd always done. Except now, she did it as Mrs. Whitmore instead of the help, which somehow made things worse, not better, because now his sister and his golf friends had to pretend to respect a woman they still privately treated like staff. I was never adopted. Harold made that decision early and made sure I knew it. "One Whitmore is enough," he used to say, ruffling Colton's hair while looking straight through me like I was part of the furniture he sold for a living. I kept my father's last name. Every school form, every parent-teacher conference, every family photo on that mantle made it clear exactly where I ranked in that house. Colton was 14 months older than me, and we grew up under the same roof for 11 years, sat at the same dinner table, rode in the same car to school every single morning. And he never once called me anything but the housekeeper's kid, always with that little smirk, like it was a joke the whole family was in on except me. Harold didn't just allow it. He encouraged it. At Colton's 16th birthday party, in front of nearly 40 guests, Harold stood up and toasted his son's guaranteed future running the showrooms, a speech he gave every single year, and never once mentioned that I'd just made valedictorian, that I'd gotten a full academic scholarship to a state university, that I existed in that house as anything more than background noise. My mother heard every one of those speeches. She never said a word. I understand now that she was terrified, a woman with no money of her own, married to a man who controlled every account and every signature in that household. And she swallowed her pride for 11 straight years, just so I'd have a roof over my head. I never once blamed her for that. But I promised myself at 17 years old that I would never build my life around waiting for that man's approval, because it was never coming. I left for college and didn't look back further than I had to. I called my mother every single Sunday without fail. I saw Harold twice a year at holidays, purely out of respect for her, never for him. 4 years ago, Harold was diagnosed with early-stage pancreatic cancer. And despite everything, despite 11 years of being made to feel invisible in his house, I drove 5 hours every other weekend for almost a year to help. I sat with him through chemotherapy sessions. I brought him soup he barely touched. I did it for my mother, and if I'm being completely honest with you right now, some stubborn, exhausted part of me was still hoping that maybe, finally, he'd see me as something other than a housekeeper's daughter. He never did. During one of those visits, thinner and weaker than I'd ever seen him, he looked at me and said, "Colton's going to need the showrooms more than ever now. Good thing there's a real son to hand it to." I didn't argue with a dying man. I just refilled his water glass and drove home in silence. What none of us knew, and I mean none of us, not even my mother, was that 3 months before that conversation, Harold had quietly met with an estate attorney named Deborah Fitch, someone completely separate from the family lawyer Colton trusted, someone recommended by his oncology nurse of all people. Harold passed away that March. The funeral was small, mostly showroom employees and Colton's golf buddies standing around uncomfortably. My mother sat in the front row in black, and I noticed she wasn't crying, because she'd already finished grieving months earlier, quietly on her own terms, the way she'd done everything in that marriage. 2 weeks later, Deborah Fitch called the family into her office for the reading of the will. Colton showed up in a suit that probably cost more than my mother's monthly salary had ever been back, when she was just the housekeeper, already talking about transition timelines for the showrooms before we'd even sat down in our chairs. That's when Deborah set a folded paper on the table and said, "Before I read the will, Mr. Whitmore asked me to read something else first." Colton actually laughed out loud. "Skip it. We don't need a speech written for the cleaning lady's daughter." He looked directly at me when he said it. Some things really do not change, no matter how many years pass. Deborah didn't laugh back. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "Sir, I'd sit down for this one." He didn't sit down. He leaned against the wall instead, arms crossed, smirking exactly the way he had at 16. And then she started reading. The letter began, "To whoever is sitting in this room deciding who deserves what. I spent 11 years letting my son believe the showrooms were his birthright simply because he shared my last name. I spent 11 years letting Margot believe she was a guest in her own home simply because she didn't. I was wrong about both of those things, and I ran out of time to say it to her face, so I'm saying it here instead." The room went completely silent. Colton's smirk was gone. Deborah kept reading. "Margot kept the books for my Riverside location for 2 summers during college, off the record, because I was too proud to hire her officially like she deserved. She caught $11,000 in vendor overbilling that my own accountant had missed for over a year. Colton has worked at the showrooms for 6 years and has never once balanced a ledger without help standing over his shoulder. I built 2 businesses on paying attention to who actually does the work, and then I went home every single night and completely ignored that same lesson with my own family. I sat there holding a coffee cup I hadn't touched once. And I want to be honest with you, I didn't feel triumphant in that moment. I felt tired, in that very specific way you feel when something true finally gets said out loud, 11 years too late to matter the way it should have." Deborah continued reading the terms. Effective immediately upon his death, 60% ownership of Whitmore Furniture Group transferred to me, Margot Delaney, on one condition, that I keep Colton employed in a management role for a minimum of 2 years, so he'd finally have a real chance to learn the business instead of simply inheriting it. The remaining 40%, along with the house itself, transferred to my mother. Outright no conditions attached because, in Harold's own words, she ran this family for 11 years without ever once being paid what she was actually worth. Colton's face went the color of old paper. "This is insane," he said, his voice cracking. "She's not even blood. She's not even a Whitmore." Deborah calmly set the letter down and turned to the final page. There was an addendum, apparently written specifically for this exact reaction. It read, "Colton, if you're arguing about blood right now, instead of asking Margot to teach you what she actually knows about running a business, you've already proven every single point I'm making." Nobody laughed this time. Not even his golf friends standing in the back of that office. Colton tried to contest the will through his own attorney, and it went absolutely nowhere. Because Deborah had documented Harold's full mental competency using 2 independent physician evaluations taken the same week he signed everything, specifically because he had predicted this exact fight before it happened. I kept my word to the letter. Colton stayed on for the full 2 years. I taught him everything I knew about the books, patiently, without ever once bringing up the 11 years he'd spent making absolutely sure I understood my place in that house. He left after his 2 years were up to start something of his own. And now we speak maybe twice a year, politely, like distant coworkers rather than the almost siblings we never actually managed to become. My mother still lives in that house today, though she's mentioned selling it more than once. She doesn't need Harold's name to feel like she belongs somewhere anymore, and honestly, I don't think she ever really did. That was always his condition to hand out, never hers to actually need. I run the showrooms now alongside a small accounting practice I built on the side because 11 years of being underestic